international newspapers now. Elena is with us here on set. We've been talking quite a lot about the Costa Concordia crash again this morning, and there's a lot more in the Italian press today.
There is indeed. Let's have a look at today's Corriere della Sera. Now, they're talking about the testimony that the captain, Francesco Cettino, gave to an Italian court last night. Now, he told them that he had followed that route, the route that he took on Friday night when the disaster occurred, several times in the past and without any problems, that this time he just forgot to turn away quite in time to avoid crashing into the coast. And also, the paper Corriere della Sera reveals, interestingly, that the same ship had followed that route in the past under different captains, and that according to their sources, it was standard practice for the cruise company to follow that route, and so that the tourists could get closer to the island of Giglio and take pictures and so on. And the Coast Guard apparently tolerated that, even though officially ships are banned in those waters quite so near to the island. Of course, now, if it was standard practice for the cruise company to follow that route, that would mean it's not really Schettino's fault, even though he's been widely vilified, of course, in the press, firstly for going in the wrong route, and secondly for having jumped off first into the lifeboat. But the paper says that if it was the cruise company that had told him to follow that route, even though it was a bit hush-hush being officially banned, then the responsibility, legally, should of course be Carnival Cruises rather than the captain's. Now, there's an interesting piece in the New York Times about the legal responsibility of cruise companies. Now, they say that they go to all sorts of measures to stop people from being able to sue cruise companies. If you go on one, you have to sign a 6,400-word-long contract, which basically you've agreed not to sue them in almost any circumstances. And the way that they deal with law is also a little bit unorthodox, as the New York Times puts it. They often register their cruise ships in countries like the Bahamas, meaning that if anything goes wrong in international waters, it'd only be the Bahamas who would be able to investigate it. And in this particular case, the cruise company's contract actually allows them to choose whether American or Italian law should apply to this case, because it's an American company, so they can effectively pick the legal system that would treat them more fairly. Now, the paper reports, as you were saying, that the US Congress has decided to investigate these legal loopholes of cruise companies, so we'll see if they decide to crack down.
Yeah, incredible revelations, if they turn out, of course, to be true. We've also been talking about Iran today, the US and EU pushing sanctions against their oil. What have the papers made of that?
Well, there's an interesting piece in The Atlantic saying that the idea of forcing regime change in Iran is becoming more and more popular in the US because the Iranian regime seems so unenthusiastic about negotiation over their nuclear plan. So all the Republican candidates have been saying on the campaign stump that if they come to power, they would force regime change in Iran. That's popular with Republican voters, but according to The Atlantic, it's completely impossible and futile. Why? Because the Iranian opposition, the Green Movement, apparently is just as keen on the nuclear movement as Ahmadinejad. Apparently 78% of supporters of Green leader Mir Hossein Mousavi also say that Iran should continue with its nuclear policy regardless. And the article says American lawmakers should realise that Iranians of all political spectrums have a strong nationalistic support for nuclear policy. So regime change wouldn't help.
We've got another diplomatic, that's the word, row, back in the headlines once again. This is between Britain and Argentina.
Yes, look at this Times front page. New Falklands alert. The British flag flying on the Falklands there, and Britain ready to enforce island garrison, it says. Now, we're coming up to the 30th anniversary of the 1982 Falklands War, and David Cameron has decided to celebrate it, if you like, by accusing the Argentinians of colonialism. Now, he said this yesterday because Argentina has been trying to get neighbouring countries to ban any ships flying a Falklands flag from docking in their ports, and Brazil and Uruguay have agreed to this. But David Cameron has gone a little bit too far, the Times thinks, in accusing Argentina of colonialism. They fired back very angrily indeed. The Argentinian newspaper El Clarín reports today that their foreign minister has accused Britain of colonialism, saying that Argentina is the victim, and David Cameron's remarks are very offensive. So it looks like there's no love lost between those two countries.
Hotting up once again. It's not the only item that you pulled out of the British press, though, that looks like they could have been printed 30 years ago.
No, there's another story in The Independent that looks rather retro. Apparently, elocution lessons are becoming more and more popular, according to the paper. Now, this does seem a little bit old-fashioned, doesn't it? They've got a picture of My Fair Lady there, Eliza Doolittle doing her elocution lessons. But according to the paper, they've become 4 times as more popular as they were a year ago, as people in Britain try and iron out their regional accents to try and make themselves more employable in the difficult jobs market. Now, I personally thought regional accents were fine nowadays, but apparently not.
Yeah, I would have thought so. We encourage them on France 24 at least. And finally, earlier, if you were watching, Elena mentioned Anne Sinclair's nomination to head the French Huffington Post. That's not gone down well with the US gossip site Gawker. This is Anne Sinclair, of course, the wife of Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
No, they've published a very harsh piece saying that she won't have been picked for that job because of her journalistic experience. It'll be because she's a famous name and is well connected. Because according to Gawker, that's how Ariana Huffington chooses to hire people. They point out that Le Monde here in France owns 34% of the new Huffington Post, and they apparently are not happy at the choice of Anne Sinclair because they're worried she might not be impartial if any stories come up about Dominique Strauss-Kahn. And they also say, Gawker rather, that they don't think the site will do very well here because the French are more intellectual than the American reading public, and the Huffington Post is so light and fluffy, they think. So, well, we'll see how it goes down with French readers when they launch on Monday.
I'm glad somebody else said that, not you or me. Elena, thank you very much. That's Elena with the international papers then, here on France 24.